You said that there are 6,000 fragments from the first century, which is wrong.
From the New Testament.
No, you see, you're not aware. You're not aware of textual criticism.
I know there's at least 5,000 to 6,000 fragments.
No, they are from the medieval period, centuries later.
That predate Muslim religion, 600
Nothing to
years.
do with the Muslim religion. I'm talking about the New Testament itself. Nothing to do with Islam. They do. I know them. They're friends of mine.
I apologize for me not knowing the rules, so to speak.
No worries. I say
So can I film you now?
So,
can I get your permission to film
okay, if you wish. Now you're asking. So, firstly, it's now accepted by virtually all biblical scholars that the King James Version is based on inferior manuscripts. We now have much earlier manuscripts we've discovered since the time of King James. Have you heard of the Codex Sinaiticus, for example?
Yes,
Have you heard of the Codex Vaticanus, for example? Right. These predate the manuscripts used by Tyndale.
Well, I brought my Bible over here because it was the King's Bible.
This is not.
Huh?
What this?
I'm sorry, I don't
What this?
I'm sorry. I don't understand what you're saying.
Okay.
Right. So it's not this is a translation, not done by King James at all. It's done by a copy by John Tyndale. King James never met Tyndale. I'm not even sure if you ever heard of him. But that's the translation you got in your hand. Now, if we use much better manuscripts, which modern translations use, this is a New Revised Standard Version, and we look at
the same words are in any translation.
they're not the same words, and that's my point. You said about piercing the hands and the feet. Was that verse 16?
Yes.
Okay, in Psalm 22. You sure it's for Psalm 6, verse 16? Yeah. Let me read to you what a modern translation has.
What's the name of the translation?
The New Revised Standard Version.
That's not a very good translation.
Oh, you know Greek, do you?
No, but I've checked it with other manuscripts.
No, but
other Bibles.
The consensus of academics now is this is a much more reliable. And the simple reason is we have more ancient manuscripts. Your translator, John Tyndale, didn't have access to these manuscripts. We have much earlier manuscripts. So what does verse 16 say? For dogs are all around me. A company of evildoers encircles me. My hands and feet have shriveled. I can count all my bones. They stare and gloat over me. That's verse 16. Now notice.
Look at the Hebrew. It's meaning a piercing.
You can read Hebrew, can you?
No, but I got a lexicon.
Okay.
I know what it says.
There's a note. Look it up now then. Look it up now in your lexicon.
Well, I'm using my phone as a camera.
There's a note here about the Hebrew. Can you read that? What does that say about the Hebrew in your passage?
Well, that's their translation.
What is the Hebrew?
Some scholars against other scholars.
So
many scholars say it's pierced, or even a line.
No modern translation has this. Your out-of-date translation, based on inferior manuscripts, has it. You've got to update to modernize your translation. It's out of date.
Well, that's your opinion, but I disagree.
Well, it's the opinion of experts. Do you read New Testament?
It's an opinion of your handpicked.
Do you read New Testament Greek?
I do not, but I have a lexicon.
Okay, I do. Seriously, I do.
So
right? Can you read Hebrew?
I can't read Hebrew.
Right,
no.
I can't. I'm just disclosure here.
Okay.
But I can tell you.
I
can tell you that when the New Testament quotes the Old Testament, it often misquotes the original. It often distorts and changes
it. Is
it.
the New Testament more toward Hebrew or Greek when it's translated?
The New Testament is in Greek.
Correct.
But when it translates the Hebrew...
Let me be more precise in my question. When they're having the Greek, when they wrote the New Testament in Greek, most of it in Greek, did they use only Hebrew?
No, they I know what the view of most scholars is, and there's no controversy in it, they didn't quote from the Hebrew.
Correct. So,
do you know what they quoted from?
When you say things are not they misquote.
Yeah, they do.
Are they quoting?
Will you let me explain?
A different book, different Greek book.
Okay. So how it goes is this: the New Testament writers nearly always quote from the Septuagint, it's a Greek translation. The Septuagint is a Greek translation of the Hebrew and the Aramaic, because the Bible, as we know, is written in Hebrew and Aramaic. Parts of Daniel, parts of Jeremiah, etc. If you compare any Greek translation, the Septuagint or the New Testament, with the Hebrew, and scholars have done this, sometimes it's quite accurate. Okay. But sometimes it's not. Sometimes it misquotes or distorts the meaning. And there are really glaring examples of this where matters of doctrine to do with the incarnation are based on mistranslations of the Hebrew Bible in the letter of Hebrews, actually.
And I'm sure your scholars, you can quote who they
yes,
are, right?
Absolutely.
Which ones are you
Bruce
to?
Metzger, Jimmy Dunn, Graham Stanton, Leslie Holden. Do you know these
scholars.
people? No, these are Christian. Jimmy Dunn is a Trinitarian scholar. You've heard of him, have you?
I've not heard of him.
Well, he's a professor at Durham University. He believes what you believe. So these are not atheists or secularists. And it doesn't really matter what they believe. Is their scholarship good? And the consensus is that, well, you just look at it. You can just do it yourself.
Yeah, I've done it.
So are you aware that the New Testament misquotes the Old Testament on matters of doctrine?
Just like the point I was trying to make. Septuagint, the New Testament quotes the Septuagint most everywhere.
Do you think the Septuagint is the Word of God? Do you think the Septuagint is the Word of God?
Do what?
Do you think the Septuagint translation is the Word of God?
Yes, yes.
You must do that because it's quoted by the New Testament.
Our New Testament quotes from the New Testament.
So when it quotes from the Hebrew Bible, it's also quoting from another Word of God.
Well, it depends on which Old Testament book. Let me ask you this question. The Old Testament, is it the same we had back before Christ? Is it the same Hebrew text?
No.
It's not. So what's different about it?
Because we have many different traditions. We have the Masoretic text,
Correct.
which is the one we tend to use there. We also have the Samaritan Pentateuch, another translation that's used in the Samaritan language. There are other also versions of the Jewish scriptures, the Hebrew scriptures, which don't exactly match what we've got today. It's quite odd, really. It seems sometimes maybe the Septuagint is quoting from a Hebrew version we no longer have when it translates
there's a few places.
So there's a number of discrepancies and contradictions. We don't have the original. What is the earliest complete copy of the Hebrew Bible we have in the world, anywhere in the world? What's the dating of it?
I think it was 300 AD or 300 or 400 AD.
No, it's about, I think it's the 10th or the 11th century AD. I think it's like the Codex Leningrad, or Leningrad Codex.
Yeah.
That's 1,000 years after Jesus. That's the earliest manuscript we have. Complete manuscript.
Maybe complete, but that's not the earliest manuscripts either.
Right.
I never said it was the earliest, but I said the earliest complete manuscript.
They use those manuscripts
Okay.
to basically.
So what's the earliest
demonstrate
fragment
that
we've got?
these are
What's
the
the earliest
scriptures,
fragment we've got?
And they are in
I don't know
agreement.
the date.
Well, Dead Sea Scrolls. So Dead Sea Scrolls contain the Jewish scriptures in part, yeah? And what's the earliest fragment we have from the Dead Sea Scrolls, for example?
Well, I know the full copy of the book of Isaiah is in the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Right.
We have the same copy today. It also has Isaiah.
It's not.
53rd chapter.
It's often not the same. But we'll let that pass.
It is.
It is.
all
You,
the
you read
same.
Hebrew, do you? You read Hebrew, do you?
It's
I
the
do
same.
not, but
Right, there you
I
go.
think a Hebrew man
You
scholars
can't
do
copy
read
it, so-
Hebrew.
Do
You
you
know the
read Hebrew?
motions of the words.
Do you read Hebrew?
So the oldest.
read Hebrew,
I don't read it either.
Okay, so then why are you?
He's arguing
You're
that
making
he
these
has
claims,
no-
not
Yeah,
me.
and that's what the Hebrew scholars have
So,
said.
what is the earliest copy we have of the Pentateuch, of the first five books of Moses?
I don't know.
It's about 200 years BC.
Now, all of these predate
But
the
it's
Quran,
interesting,
and
when-
they all
when-
match.
600 years
They all
before
match.
the
That
Quran.
doesn't undermine.
When did Moses live, do you- when did
reliability,
Moses live, do you think?
The validity of the scriptures. These
Okay.
all
But when did
match.
Moses
There's
live?
all the
It
major
doesn't-
points
See, if
of
Moses lived
doctrine
about
and history.
2000 BC, yeah. So we have a
All
gap
these predate
of
the
about
Quran,
we have
and
a
at
gap
the
of
time
about
of the Quran, it says,
two.
"Except
Excuse
what
me,
was revealed in the Torah."
Should we
I
go
thought
over
this
here?
was Speaker's Corner.
You're interrupting. So as I was saying, we have a gap. We have a gap of
So I
about
think if
2,000
you make a point,
years.
If it's fair,
We have a
others should
2,000
be able to
years.
respond.
No, it's not fair.
How is it not fair?
It's a Speaker's Corner.
But all these predate anything from the last 2,000 years.
But the point is, we have a gap of nearly 2,000 years between the originals, which you think is the Jewish Bible, the Genesis through to Exodus,
No, there's no gap.
Numbers. Well, okay, but the oldest copies we've got are the Dead Sea Scrolls, and they're about 200, 300 BC. Moses lived 2000 BC,
Yeah, at least.
so we have a gap of nearly 2,000 years. So how do we know that the Jewish manuscripts have been reliably
So we have been
translated?
saved in the.
Sorry?
Is it okay for the
Yeah, I just had to because he was interrupting. Yeah.
So we have the Dead Sea Scrolls that prove the canon of the Old Testament.
No, they didn't. How does it prove it?
Yeah, they're.
Okay. Do we have the originals?
I don't
Do we have the
the
originals?
But I can
Okay.
go find it
Or,
for you.
But if the originals go back to
and the Injil.
Moses, if the originals go back to Moses, is that right? Moses wrote the
Yeah, I
Pentateuch,
believe
right?
that, yes.
So when Moses lived about 2000 BC, the sake of
I don't
argument?
know the exact dates.
Do you think it's roughly fair?
Do what?
Roughly fair, about 2000 BC, 2500 BC.
Somewhere possibly.
So if the oldest copies we've got are the Dead Sea Scrolls, and Moses lived many, many centuries before, how do we know that the original has been faithfully preserved and handed to us today?
We definitely do because of the scribes. In fact, the scribes, they held that, they wrote,
Well, what scribes?
they wrote and kept the Torah, the Tanakh, they kept it in order all those years.
But this
Even
is,
the New Testament.
but this is much, much later. We know that during the medieval period, they preserved it. In the early centuries, thousands of years ago, you didn't have a scholarly class or a scribe class that did this.
So the Tanakh, the New Testament's based on the Tanakh, the Old Testament. It was quoted.
Okay,
in the
but let's
Septuagint.
look at the New Testament. What's the oldest complete copy of the New Testament we have?
That's irregardless. We know we have
Well, no,
records.
we have
church
it.
fathers
It's
quote the whole Bible. Yeah.
we have the Codex.
Easily by the
Codex
earliest-
Sinaiticus.
There are scripts, parchments, small pieces that date
Yeah.
back to the
Okay.
early first century.
How many
Do you believe-
manuscripts-
Do you agree with that?
How many? Let me ask you. How many
Well,
manuscripts
I'd like
do we
to
have from the first
I'd like to have a
century?
confirmation. Do you believe that?
No, I don't.
You don't believe that you can go
No,
find...
it's not a question what I believe. It's a question what's the evidence.
Predate the
So-
Quran.
So there's
So-
not actual parchments of the New Testament predating
So from the
120
first,
AD.
exactly. So from the first century, how many manuscripts or fragments do we have of the New Testament? Roughly, how many?
About
The
6,000.
manuscripts
we have
of the
none.
New Testament predate
None
the
at all.
Quran.
Nothing. Not a single
The
fragment. Nothing at
manuscripts
all.
of the New Testament
Because
predate the Quran.
let's go over here.
And the Quran says we accept what was revealed in the Gospel.
Okay.
So you
I'm
know
just
this
trying
is-
to
hey.
yeah, because he's trying to hijack the
Paul
conversation.
Williams. He's an experienced
So-
Muslim debater, and he's trying to control the conversation.
I
And of
am
course he's
because
trying
you're
lead
trying
it.
to derail it and hijack it.
No, if I respond
So,
with a valid
so
point,
my
then
point
you're
is-
obligated to respond
No,
to
I'm
it.
not. This is Speaker's
Okay,
Corner. It's Speaker's
then
Corner.
then you're afraid
So,
of the argument.
I'm terribly
And that's a
afraid.
coward.
Terribly
You know,
afraid.
every
You're looking at abusing me now. Which thing for you?
That's right.
You're not welcome in this
Every one
conversation.
of these
I can go.
predates
This is
Muslim
Speaker's Corner.
beliefs.
Fine.
by hundreds of
Corner.
But the point is
We
this:
speak,
if we have
we
no
preach,
manuscripts in
and
the
there's
first
no
century, how
question
many do we
about
have from the second century AD of the New Testament?
We're happy to have a
Yeah.
dialogue, but your
There's plenty
speaker
from
doesn't want to have a
Look,
dialogue.
give me an example.
Well, I
From
don't
the
have
first
the list.
century.
I
There are
don't
none
have
from
the
the first
list. I know
century.
I've seen them though.
What is it?
Where have you seen them? I've seen them on pictures.
Can we have a dialogue?
There are no fragments from the first
I want to have
century.
a dialogue, but I'm
At the
commanded
beginning of
to
the second
preach.
century.
I'm
Right,
commanded
not
to
or
preach.
north from the beginning of the second.
120 AD.
Okay, we have the Johannine fragment, a credit card-sized fragment, about the middle of the second
You know what
century.
P95 is?
Yeah, and not
What is it?
95.
What
Okay,
is it?
we have a
What is
fragment.
P95?
Let me explain.
Okay.
We have a fragment of John's Gospel in the John Rylands Library in Birmingham, which is dated to about the middle of the second century. This is just a credit card-sized fragment, yeah? But that's not the Gospel of Matthew, the Gospel of Mark, the Gospel of Luke. It's not the Paul's letters. It's not anything else. Just a fragment. So when do we have the complete New Testament? That's in the 4th century. It's called the Codex Sinaiticus and the Codex Vaticanus. This is the earliest complete manuscripts we have. That's
That
4th
predates the
century.
Quran.
Okay,
That
that's
predates the Quran.
That's 4 centuries
That predates the
after
Quran.
Jesus. Yeah.
That
So,
predate the
so
Quran.
do you not believe that Moses is real? That's the way I'm understanding
No,
it.
that's a completely different point.
So,
He's real.
so
He's
it's-
real.
It comes to the point.
No, it
So-
doesn't. No, I believe he's
Yeah,
real. But the point is, the manuscripts are many, many centuries after Moses.
The Quran came
So we
way
can't
later than
we
Moses,
can't
and yet
know
it
that they
talks
are
about Moses.
have been reliably
The
transmitted.
Quran came way
Yeah.
later than Jesus and talks about
let me
Jesus.
ask you this.
Yeah,
Are there
yeah.
any fragments that prove Muhammad's existence?
The Quran came
Okay,
way
you want
later.
to?
Is there any literature that proves his
Okay. But
existence?
before we change the subject completely and talk about another religion, let's finish off with what I was
To me,
saying.
you're really not satisfactorily answering that question.
Well, that's fine because perhaps it's all new to you. You're not familiar with the subject. So maybe you need time to process it. So when I
I'm familiar with the argument.
Well, no, but you're not,
I
because-
just don't have the list of
because you said that there are 6,000 fragments from the 1st century, which is
from
wrong.
the New Testament.
No, you see, you're not aware. You're not aware of textual
I
criticism.
know there's at least 5,000 to 6,000 fragments.
No, they are from the medieval period, centuries later.
That predate Muslim religion, 600
Nothing to
years.
do with the Muslim religion. I'm talking about the New Testament itself. Nothing to do with Islam. I'm talking about the New Testament. So we don't have any fragments
So
from
you
the
don't
1st
know what
century.
P95 is. So you don't know any...
Tell me what P95 is.
So you don't know any of these fragments in the early 2nd century?
I do. I just mentioned the John Rylands fragment in the university in Manchester. Have you seen it?
I have not.
I've seen it.
I would like to go see
Can you read it?
I cannot read it.
I can read it.
I got a way that I can take a picture of it and translate it.
Yeah, that's good. I don't need a translator.
So you can read Hebrew.
I think we've been through this before, going around in circles. Anyway, I'm going to go now. Your gentleman is obviously quite excitable. Is he from America as well?
I think so.
Okay.
You have a good day.
I hope you have a good time in England.